If you watched any wrestling over the past week, chances are you saw some amazing matches. 11 ranked teams lost this week, shaking up the top 25. But Iowa was not one of those teams, and that's what this week's show is all about. We're talking about Eierman potentially pulling his red shirt, the upcoming Iowa Revenge Tour. What is that? I'm going to tell you. And the Penn State versus Iowa match preview. I know you are looking really forward to that match, and you will not want to miss this. So let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to the Fanco Wrestling Show, the #1 wrestling podcast on YouTube. And this is a very special day for me because it is the 1-year anniversary of me uploading the first video to Fanco Wrestling YouTube channel, and this is the 225th official video on the channel, so it's been such a great time growing with you and doing that together, and we have a lot to talk about on this show. But before I do that, the one thing I want to talk about is Be Superior Wrestling, a great wrestling brand by wrestlers for wrestlers. It's a streetwear wrestling brand with premium and limited apparel, with super soft tees, hoodies, sweatshirts, and headbands. There's some great gear, and I really recommend it. So make sure that if you're interested in this type of gear, that you check out the link in the description below. A direct link that will take you straight to the website and show you everything going on with Be Superior Wrestling. Now, as far as what's going on in the world of wrestling, like I said at the beginning of this, if you watched any type of wrestling this past week, there have been so many upsets, so many great things that happen. Now, one thing is NC State and Virginia Tech, they keep their dominance. And I want to say too, this segment in the world of wrestling, it's just talking everything going on in the world of wrestling that doesn't necessarily have a main topic on this show, but I still want to talk about that. So NC State and Virginia Tech continue their dominance, and that's a match that I really want to see happen, and will be going down in February, actually at NC State, which I'm going to try to be at if I can. Now, a couple other matches that happened. Nebraska loses to Wisconsin. Minnesota now defeats Wisconsin. With Stevenson, it's great to see him back in the lineup, finally, getting some heavyweights. With news that Kassar's been out over the past couple weeks, it's great that now we do have another great heavyweight in the heavyweight contention. Now, another match, UNC defeating Princeton and Northwestern, losing to Purdue and Penn State. And that kind of segues me into Penn State's lineup. So the first thing in the world of wrestling that I want to talk about really is what's going on with Penn State's lineup. I mean, I don't want to go too in-depth about this, but the fact is there have been some weird things going on. There have been some very strange things going on with their lineup. Roman Bravo Young out with sickness. Brady Berge out. Vincenzo out against Illinois. I mean, these guys were all out against Illinois, and it was just a shame. Now, we did get to see Rashid in. We got to see Neville's in. Of course, the next match we saw Shakur Rashid unfortunately lose at 197 pounds, but it's great to see Neville's in the lineup and wrestling well. Because in that match with Northwestern, then everybody was back but Berge, who would have wrestled a tough match, and it's just unfortunate to see that going on. I know there were a lot of comments on Twitter whenever it's the Penn State Twitter and Flow Twitter, just like, what's going on? Where are these guys? And I want to think that Kale has a plan, but the fact is we hadn't seen them wrestle in over a month. They didn't wrestle Midlands. They didn't wrestle Scuffle. They didn't wrestle anywhere, and they come out looking not the best against Illinois, and we'll see how they do going forward. One of the other exciting matches over this past week was Evan Wick and Isaiah White. Now, Wick, this was considered an upset. I would consider these two very strong, similar wrestlers in their style as well. They're both kind of like tall guys at 165. Solid match. Isaiah White came out strong, getting a takedown, but Evan Wick ended up being just a little bit too much for him and beating him in the duel. Now, Wisconsin did end up winning that duel against Nebraska, like I said at the beginning. Another quick topic I want to mention is Campbell Wrestling defeating number 11 Iowa State. I think this was one of the biggest upsets of this past week. Please let me know if you agree or disagree. But they beat Iowa State 22-14. giving Arizona State a pretty tough match, with that final score being 21-8. A couple of matches to note here: Noah Gonser defeating Todd Small, both top-ranked guys, big matches. Andrew Morgan over Marcus Coleman in a sudden victory decision, and then Jerry Hino defeating Gannon Grumwell. That was a very nice ranked win for him to come into the new year. And then a couple of close matches with Arizona State. One of the best matches that I saw in that duel was Quentin Perez and Josh Shields. Now, for Campbell, of course, they wanted Perez to win. However, in overtime, Shields came out on top. And then the last topic, before we get into the main topics today, the things that I want to discuss are there's a lot of excitement at 141 pounds. A lot of excitement. Mostly because Tristan Moran knocked off Mitch McKee and Chad Red, beating both those guys, whereas Chad Red has already wrestled a couple guys this season, like Luke Pletcher, like Dom Demas, and lost to him. And then McKee loses to Pletcher, but he does have a win over Dom Demas. So, and then the one other guy I want to throw in the mix there is Josh Heil, who just beat Tristan Moran at Midlands and then ultimately lost to Max Murin. So, I mean, this weight, I think, is just in total fluctuation. The only one right now that I see in total control of the weight class is Luke Pletcher. He's had a strong year so far, undefeated season, and we'll see how he does against guys like Nick Lee and Max Murin once all these guys start getting into the mix over the next couple of weeks with duels as well as conference championships, and I'm excited to see what's going on there. So let's get into today's topics. And the first main topic of the day is discussing Eierman pulling his red shirt. Could Jaden Eierman pull his red shirt? And another one I want to throw in the mix is Nick Suriano. So this is something, it's actually quite funny how it came about, because this comes about from a tweet that Jaden Eierman threw out, and all he said was essentially, during the match, one of Iowa's matches, Flow Wrestling said, "Is this the best 1-2 punch in college wrestling?" And Eierman said, 1, 2, 3? Inferring that maybe he could be pulling his red shirt, his Olympic red shirt. Now, interestingly enough, I had these topics for this show last week, and before this tweet was even sent out, before Flow Wrestling even wrote an article about it, I had this idea that Eierman could be pulling his red shirt. And now, with that being said, I stand even behind that. Now, if you're unfamiliar with why he's redshirting, it's an Olympic redshirt in which an athlete can spend a year training for the Olympics. Now, of course, you have to qualify for that redshirt. There are a couple of different ways to qualify: being a national team member, placing at tournaments like the U.S. Open, or being top 3 in the NCAA. Now, it can be pulled at any time. We saw that happen before. You may be wondering, has that happened before? It has happened before with Kyle Snyder, initially taking that Olympic redshirt year in 2016, pulling it on January 17th, and then winning nationals as well as the Olympics. So he won both of those tournaments in the same year, which does not happen very often. And so the fact that Eierman now tweeted this out, kind of hinting that he could be making a comeback. Now, what weight will he come back at? Most likely it's going to be 141, where he has been in the past. Why would he be pulling his red shirt? Well, he didn't qualify for the Olympic team trials yet because of the tournaments that he's wrestled. His last chance to qualify is the last chance qualifier coming up in a few months, but the other chance that he could qualify is winning nationals. If he wins nationals, he qualifies for the Olympic team trials, which will be big for him, obviously, because then he could have a chance to make the Olympic team. Now, Eierman is a 3-time All-American and has just transferred into Iowa this year. Now, at 141 for Iowa right now is Max Murin, who is in the top 3 currently in the weight class. So the fact that the Eierman could also easily be ranked in that top 3 because of wins last year over Mitch McKee at Nationals, in which he had an 8-5 victory, as well as he win over Dom Demas at Nationals with a 2-zip victory. So, I mean, the other thing about this guy, he's the only college wrestler to defeat Yanni, but with Yanni being out this year, maybe Eierman sees that this could be a chance to win, because, of course, Yanni did end up beating him in the future, now, or I guess after that match. Now, the other guy here that I like to discuss is Nick Suriano. Nick Suriano, now, here's the difference here. And please let me know if you think either of these guys could pull the red shirts. I just thought Suriano was an interesting choice because this year, with a couple guys out at 133, I think that's a big weight where there are a couple Olympic red shirts. Suriano could come back and have a strong second half of the season. He is already qualified for the Olympic team trials by defeating Darian Cruz, Nashon Garrett as well, but he did lose to Vito Arujau of Cornell. Now, of course, he is another guy at 133, but he's out the season taking his Olympic redshirt year. Suriano, two-time national finalist as well as a national champ last year, first ever for Rutgers, and we could see he's had some strong matches at 141 or 133, excuse me, with DeSanto, with Rivera, with Philippi, all guys who are top in the weight class. The only guy who he hasn't wrestled is Gross. The only time they wrestled was at the Bill Farrell of this last year, where it was a very close match. The reason I think that he could potentially pull his red shirt is he wasn't top at senior nationals. He wasn't top of the podium. However, he did place and he did qualify for the Olympic team trials. But I think there's a chance that we could see Suriano pull his red shirt, and that's nothing but pure speculation for me. He didn't put out any tweets. He didn't say anything was going on, just like Jaden Eierman did. But that's just my thoughts on the situation. Now, let's move on to the next topic, and this is a doozy. This is a doozy. Now, how did Iowa wrestling shift to a predominantly Pennsylvania wrestling lineup? You may be wondering what I'm talking about. What is going on with Iowa's lineup? What am I saying? What does this even mean? Well, before I get to that, I want to mention the sponsor, Wrestling with Virtue, a great wrestling club in Pennsylvania, in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, run by Coach Brian Krenzlock, who has 20-plus years of wrestling experience in the Canton-McMillan area. It's a club not only for wrestling, but for faith and talking all about character development and virtues. You may have seen him on a recent video on my channel discussing all those sorts of things. So if you're in that area, you make sure you want to check that out and click the link in the description below to learn more. But as far as Iowa's new wrestling lineup, what the heck is going on here? Well, I want to show you something real quick. And the first thing I want to show you is this. This graph. Iowa Hawkeyes roster since 2009. So from 2009 to 2019, Iowa's roster is down 33% in Iowa recruits and up 17% in Pennsylvania recruits on their entire roster. So, that ranges each year from 30 to 40 to around 40 to 50 guys each year. Now, in 2009, there were 30 Iowa guys on the roster, and spattered throughout the lineup. And there were 0 from Pennsylvania. Move on a few years to 2015, 20 guys from Iowa, 1 from Pennsylvania. And in this current year, there are 15 guys from Iowa on the entire roster and 6 from Pennsylvania. So what the heck is the deal there? Now, the other graph I have here is just showing, I'm going to pull this up and showing you the Iowa's Hawkeyes roster in 2009 versus all the other states. Pennsylvania is a big one. There are a couple big states here that, just to look out for, but it's just another cool graph that I put together all about their lineups. Now, why would Iowa, why would the Tom and Terry brands switch away from Iowa recruits when they were doing so well? And I don't think this is necessarily anything against Iowa. I want to make that kind of clear. I think that this has a lot to do with Pennsylvania. So looking back at 2009, in the past Iowa wrestling, they won their conference championships from 2008 to 2010, also won nationals during those years, and during that time, kind of after that, Iowa kind of started shifting away. Didn't lose. They weren't necessarily, it's not like they went off a cliff. It's not like they were a horrible program or anything, but they just went down a little bit years after that. And at that time, a similar time, Penn State wrestling started going up. What's the correlation there? Well, Penn State had a lot of strong Pennsylvania guys in their lineup. Looking at, and I'm talking early, Frank Molinaro, Ed Ruth, Quentin Wright, and then getting into the Jason Knopfs, getting into the Zane Rutherfords and the Vincenzo Josephs, kind of over time. Well, Tom Brands, being the smart coach that he is, he kind of sees that this is where a lot of the wrestlers are coming from. They're coming from Pennsylvania. They're coming from Western Pennsylvania specifically. In my video last week, I talked about Spencer Lee and how he's affected the program, bringing that into Iowa. So, like I said, let's talk about a little bit about this history. And the first thing that I want to kind of show here is just discussing the order. How did this happen? How did this change over time? And then I'll show you the exact lineups. And I think this is huge because I think the lineups from 2009 to 2019 are just crazy to look at as far as PA versus Iowa. So let's discuss this. Well, in 2010, like I said, that was the year there were 30 guys from Iowa in the roster. 2011, that's when they started adding a couple Pennsylvania guys. Looking at Josh Jebwa, a state champ. Looking at Mike Evans, another state champ, freestyle state champ, and eventually a 3-time All-American. Both of these guys are from Pennsylvania. Now, interestingly enough, they were from other sides of the state and not from the western side of the state, which is where we'll be getting to in a little bit. Jean-Jacques, a transfer from Rutgers, was there for a year, and then that was 2013. And then 2015 was whenever Kemmerer kind of committed and was added to the Iowa lineup. From Murraysville, Pennsylvania, a Young Guns wrestler, a Franklin Regional wrestler, a Whitfield wrestler with strong... Now, during this time, during 2015, I want to say that Iowa still had very strong ties to Iowa. They had Thomas Gilman, an Iowa guy, Brandon Sorensen, an Iowa guy, Vince Turk, Cash Wilkie, who's still in the lineup. Iowa wrestlers through and through. There were still so many Iowa wrestlers in this lineup. Now, as we start to transition more and we start to see guys like Spencer Lee commit with Gavin Teasdale at the time, they did commit on at the same time. Michael Kemmerer, Caleb Young. We start to see Max Murin all commit to Iowa and start going there. 2017, 2018, I mean, that was just kind of a massive year when they added all these guys, as well as a Pat Dugan, who's not with Iowa anymore, but he's wrestling somewhere else. And then 2018, we see a guy from Pennsylvania shift in with DeSanto. And, that was a little bit controversial with him and Lee. 2019, that's when Teasdale finally transferred out of Penn State into Iowa, and that's where we get this lineup right here. This is the lineup that I'm talking about. Now, what's interesting here is the guys in yellow, these are the guys who are from Iowa, originally from Iowa, wrestling for Iowa. And the blue on the right-hand side from Pennsylvania. Now at 41, you'll see that I have Eierman also kind of highlighted. He's not actually from Pennsylvania, he's from Missouri. But we see that what's interesting here is that on 2009, there were 6 guys from Iowa out of 30-some that were on their 30 total guys in Iowa's roster, and they were all in the lineup. Whereas on this side, with the current year, we see there are 6 guys from Pennsylvania in the lineup. No, 5 guys from Pennsylvania, but 6 total PA guys in the lineup, with Gavin Teasdale being that 6th guy. Now, I think this is a big shift for Pennsylvania, for Iowa, I should say, and it's really showed that this is possibly the reason that they are so dominant now. They're getting these best recruits. Tom Brands is showing that these are the top guys in the country that they're wrestling, and this is the first time in I don't know how long since there has not been an Iowa wrestler in the lineup, because recently we saw Sod out or in the lineup compared to Brands and Wilkie, who are both from Iowa. Just some interesting statistics there. Please let me know what you think about this. Is this bizarre to you? Is this right where Iowa should be? Are you an Iowa wrestling fan? Is there any issues that you have with this? I just find it very interesting to look at. Now, let's talk about Iowa's Revenge Tour. The Iowa Revenge Tour is coming. The Iowa Revenge Tour is coming. And if you're an Iowa wrestling fan, you probably can't wait for this. I mean, you also may be wondering, what is the Revenge Tour? What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, before I talk about that, I do want to talk about the sponsor of this video, Be Superior Wrestling, a great wrestling brand. I have a link to them right in the description below, but telling you a little bit about them. They're a premium and limited wrestling brand streetwear company where you can wear hoodies. They have shirts. They have headbands, a great wrestling brand company. You may want to check that out. Now, the one thing I want to talk about with the Iowa tour is Iowa has a few duels coming up, some of their toughest duels in a few years, and Iowa has lost to every single one of these teams. Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and Oklahoma State. The last time Iowa wrestled all four of these teams, they lost. They lost to Oklahoma State last year. They lost to Michigan the year before, as well as Penn State and Ohio State, which is the last time they wrestled in 2018. But I'm going to get into that and talk about the Iowa Revenge Tour. Now, the first team that Iowa has coming up in this season is Ohio State. And Iowa versus Ohio State will be happening on January 24th. The last time they met was January of 2018, whenever Iowa lost 22-12. Now, this was a very interesting match because Ohio State actually broke Iowa's 24 conference road wins streak. They were on a streak. They were wrestling really well on the road, but they lost to Ohio State. Now, big things during this match. I mean, some of the biggest wins was when Spencer Lee beat NATO. That was a massive win for Spencer Lee, propelling him all the way to the top, as well as Sorensen getting a win, Kemmerer getting one in Marinelli. Now, of course, Ohio State, some of their biggest wins were Pletcher and McKenna, as well as Miles Martin, Colin Moore, and of course, that's when they had Kyle Snyder in the mix. Now, interestingly enough, there are going to be some great matches this time, too. We're going to see DeSanto versus Decatur, Murin versus Pletcher, top 1 versus number 3 ranked wrestlers, Lugo versus Sasso. Which the last time they wrestled, Sasso won at Midlands, which could be a potentially interesting match. And please let me know as I'm going through this, who will Iowa beat out of all these teams? Because this year is the year I think they could win all 4. If they win all 4, the revenge tour is complete. Now, the next match that these guys have is on January 31st. January 31st of this year is when Penn State and Iowa goes down. They will be wrestling at Iowa, just like they will be wrestling Ohio State at Iowa. The last time they wrestled, they lost 28-13. A pretty upsetting duel for the Hawkeyes. Some big matches during this. Possibly the biggest was whenever Marinelli beat Vincenzo Joseph. I mean, the number 1 ranked wrestler in Cenzo, and Marinelli came in and beat him. That was huge. The last 2 times these guys have wrestled, Marinelli has won. We're going to see that match again at the end of January. The last matchup was also one of the biggest college duels in wrestling history, the highest attended in history, one of the highest attended in wrestling history. I think one of the most at the Bryce Jordan Center. Now, we also saw Zane Rutherford versus Brandon Sorensen. Mark Hall come out, get a nice big pin as well, followed by Bo Nickel. And then we also saw a big upset in Shakur Rashid versus Cash Wilkie. But this year, while we're seeing a couple of those guys wrestle again, we're going to see DeSanto versus RBY, which DeSanto is already 2-0 against RBY in the history of them wrestling, but we're going to see that again. Murin versus Nick Lee. I mean, 41 just seems to be the weight that Iowa is just wrestling everybody tough at. Caleb Young versus Berge, and Kemmerer versus Hall are a couple other matches we could see. Are they going to beat Penn State this year? I think there's a chance. Now, talking about the next matchup that Iowa has to beat, and that's Michigan. The last time they wrestled, Iowa was number 4 and Michigan was number 7 in the country. This was actually in January of 2018, so 2 years ago, but the next time they're wrestling is in February. We could see Pat Lugo versus Kanan Storr wrestle. That's a possibility. We'll see, depending on what's going on with Storr, as well as Cassiope and Mason Paris, I think, would be the biggest one here. Now, the last time, what happened? How did Michigan end up beating the Hawkeyes in this very close scoring duel? Micic won, Pantelio won, Amin beat Caleb Young, that was a big win, Abinator won, as well as Kuhn beating Stoll, which was one of the biggest matches there. Of course, Iowa still had a couple big wins there, but those wins propelled Iowa to Michigan to a victory. And the last match, which I don't know which one of these as a Hawkeye fan you're looking most forward to, or because I think Oklahoma State was probably one of the most upsetting losses recently, just because Iowa got kind of stumped at Oklahoma State, but this time they're at Iowa, and it's going to be a great match because this match goes, I mean, this is one of the longest traditions, longest histories of wrestling duels is between Iowa and Oklahoma State. Last time they were number 3 and number 2. This time Oklahoma State is a little bit further down in the rankings, but Iowa is at that number 1. We could see the Spencer Lee versus Nick Piccinini, another rematch between these two. Of course, last year Pitch rocked Spencer Lee, and that was a big upset for him in a huge match whenever he pinned him. We could see Lugo versus Llewellyn, as well as Warner versus Gear. Last time, like I said, Spencer Lee, that upset, losing, as well as the Fix versus DeSanto match. What a big one. We won't see that this year, of course, because Oklahoma State has a couple of those guys out on Olympic red shirts. But that is the 2020 Iowa Revenge Tour. Please let me know, what do you think about this? Did you even realize that Iowa had lost to these 4 teams, that these were the last 4 teams Iowa's lost to, and could they beat them this year? I think there's a very good shot that Iowa wins every single one of these matches. Now, the first thing, before I get in this video, I want to remember to subscribe to this video as well as this channel, because then you get all sorts of wrestling news updates. Now, the Iowa versus Penn State match preview. The Iowa versus Penn State match preview. I know this is what you're looking forward to. Iowa versus Penn State 2020. There are so many great things to come out of this, and I'm looking really forward to it. Now, before I get into the predictions in the projected lineups and who's going to wrestle, and now that we know who's out on Penn State, we know that Kassar's out and not going to wrestle. We know that Connell's out, not going to wrestle, but who is in? Well, before I get to that, I want to talk about the last 3 meetings between these teams. The last 3 meetings are this right here. The last 3 meetings, February 2018, January 2017, and February of 2015. Iowa has 1 win out of those 3, and that was in February of 2015, whenever they defeated number 5 Penn State. And that was a little bit of a down year for Penn State. However, Iowa, no slack to them. That was a great win with upsets coming in each of those duels. I want to talk about the upsets real quick that came out of each of these matches, as well as some of the ranked wins. So first of all, last year in that duel, but the biggest upset was Marinelli over Vincenzo Joseph. We saw Marinelli win again, but that was the biggest upset. And then we also saw for Penn State, Rashid beat Cash Wilkie, and Neville's beat Stoll. And this year we have another Neville's in Penn State's lineup, which will be interesting to see. And then we, of course, got that Rutherford versus Sorensen duel. We got that match again right after this 2017 duel whenever they wrestled, and Rutherford won. The biggest upset here, which technically at the time wasn't an upset, was Alex Meyer over Mark Hall. It was Mark Hall's first ever duel in Carver Hawkeye Arena, ever even pulled out of red shirt, I should say, his first duel, and he lost to number 13, Alex Meyer. Now, of course, Hall went on later that year to win the national championship, but that year he lost. Now, the thing also I want to discuss is Thomas Gilman over Suriano. At that time, Suriano wrestling at Penn State was big. And then in the year before that, a couple of these upsets was the biggest year for upsets whenever Jimmy Goulabon beat Corey Clark, Garrett Hammond beat Nick Moore, Matt Brown beat Mike Evans, which was a number 3 versus number 2 match, in McIntosh over Burak. Those were all upsets for Penn State. And that leads me to the first topic that I want to talk about regarding this upcoming match. And the first topic I want to discuss here is Penn State's, because I know everybody's already doubting Penn State and putting Iowa over Penn State. But the fact is, in the last 3 duels, Penn State has had 7 upsets. Iowa has had 1. And if you want to give them the Mark Hall one, cool. That's cool. 2 upsets. Now, wins over ranked opponents, Iowa's had 6, Penn State's had 9. Keep that in mind when you're looking at this lineup. So, let's look at the lineup, guys. Let's look at the lineup. This is the full dual preview, Penn State versus Iowa. Right here is, we're going to see first at 125 pounds. At 125 pounds, we're going to see Spencer Lee versus Brandon Meredith. Now, these two have never wrestled, but I really believe that Spencer Lee is on another level than Meredith, than really a lot of guys in college and a lot of guys in the weight class, in college in general. Meredith's having a solid season. Redshirt freshman, he's young, okay? Spencer Lee, he's a pinner. He's looking to come out strong. Brandon Meredith is ranked, though, for Penn State. And then at 133, let's move on from 125, Spencer Lee. Let's move on to 133. And at 133, the one match we're going to see here is Austin DeSanto versus Roman Bravo Young. And these two have wrestled a couple times before. I love seeing them wrestle. Love both their styles. Roman Bravo Young's a little bit more sleek of a wrestler, whereas DeSanto's more of a grind you out type of wrestler, and I like to see those styles go up against each other. Now, DeSanto, I believe, has wrestled a little bit tougher competition this season. I think Iowa's lineup, in general, has seen better competition this season, but that's going on at 133. At 141, we're going to see Murin versus Nick Lee, with the potential to see Jaden Eierman if he pulls that red shirt. Now, of course, these two have wrestled in the past. Nick Lee is 2-0 against him, and they had kind of similar competition this season all throughout. Nothing amazing, but some solid competition. And the first time they wrestled, Lee actually was made in. I want to talk about now Nick Lee versus Eierman as opposed to Murin. Eierman actually majored Nick Lee. And so I think there's a chance if Eierman pulls his red shirt, which could happen, you could see these two wrestle, and that will be a heck of a match. But I think even against Murin, it's going to be a close match when these two wrestle. Now, moving on to the next weight, moving on to 149, we're going to see the top-ranked wrestler in Pat Lugo wrestling Jared Verclaren. Now, Lugo is having an excellent season, already beating Austin O'Connor, who was the number one ranked wrestler at the time. Now, he has not wrestled Verclaren, but he has wrestled Brady Berge, who Berge is up a weight now at 157. But I kind of see Berge and Verclaren similar type of wrestlers, but that's just kind of showing against Penn State guys that he's wrestled. Now, a few losses on the year is what Verk's had so far. Nothing crazy, no crazy major wins, and that's why I think it's going to be tough. Now, we have seen in the past, Verclaren's a guy who will wrestle that top competition, and he'll go out and have a match with him. We saw that happen with Micah Jordan last year in the Ohio State duel. He didn't end up getting the victory, but he came out strong whenever everybody thought Ohio State's beaten Penn State last year, and ultimately it didn't happen. Now, moving on to 157, is Caleb Young and Brady Berge. This should be a heck of a match. We haven't seen Berge really wrestle much this season, but we have seen Caleb Young wrestle. Now, Berge is 1-0 versus common opponents because these two have never wrestled. Now, Young is an All-American, while Berge's only made the round of 16. I'll be interested to see where they fall because they're both top 10 ranked wrestlers, and I just want to see that. But 165, this is the marquee matchup. This is the marquee matchup is at 165 with Marinelli versus Vincenzo. You probably know the story. These two have wrestled before a couple times. First in the dual meet in 2018 whenever Marinelli came out and upset Vincenzo Joseph, at the time number one ranked wrestler, whereas Vincenzo then they wrestled again at Big Ten last year, and Marinelli kind of stuck it to him. Now, the interesting thing here is that Vincenzo has performed better than him at the national tournament. However, we're not talking about the national tournament right now. We're talking about the dual meet. And Marinelli has showed that he can beat Vincenzo before. But we'll see what happens this year. I'm interested to see. Now, the other one I'm interested to see is Michael Kemmer versus Mark Hall. Mark Hall and Kemmer have never wrestled before. And that's because Kemmer was down a couple weights. He was down a couple weights last time wrestling against Jason Nolf in the duel. And Kemmer and Hall are both top 5 ranked. Of course, Mark Hall, the number 1 in the weight class. And they have never wrestled because of that. Now, So far this season, Kemmer has been handling himself well. We haven't seen him wrestle a lot. Maybe it's due to injury, maybe it's due to a couple other things, but he's been wrestling fine at 174. He's wrestled well against Nolf in the past, whether that's due to them wrestling multiple times growing up together, or, I mean, just because obviously he's a great wrestler. But I'm interested to see where Kemmer and Mark Hall, how that stacks out. And at 184, this is a match that means a lot just because we get to see the new talent in each of these teams. And Assad, who was able to just pull his redshirt year as a true freshman now, taking that spot, 184 spot, over Cash Wilkie, over Nelson Brands, is Assad. And for Penn State, of course, we see Aaron Brooks. Now, as I mentioned, Assad pulled his red shirt against Indiana, wrestled well at Midlands, losing to UNI's Lujan. It lost 4-zip. And now Lujan's a top ranked wrestler. Losing only 4-zip is impressive. The other thing I want to mention is we haven't really seen much out of Aaron Brooks this year. Just because he hasn't really wrestled that much. In the past, he's done well over the last couple of seasons, but hasn't really wrestled a lot of college matches. So that's why I'm just really interested to see how this young talent looks. And then at 197, the guy that we have is Jacob Warner and Shakur Rashid. Now, we've already seen Shakur lose this season, and Jacob Warner, of course, has a couple of losses, but Warner already has a win on the season over Brunner of Purdue, and he, of course, is one of the ranked above Warner. Warner now is the number 3, and Rashid fell he was top ranked at 184, but now that he's at 197, made that jump. He's number 23. Now, Rashid in the past, yes, he has wrestled Iowa wrestlers. He majored Cash Wilkie, but that was at 84. Wrestled Brunner, and he actually, I believe he beat him before, so that's kind of a common opponent there. And, after seeing him wrestle against Northwestern, not the best match for him. I mean, he had a couple takedowns and ended up losing. I think it was 7-5, but it'll be interesting to see how these two stack up. And then ultimately, the last match that we have here is at 285, and that's Anthony Cassiope versus Seth Nevels. Both these guys, young guys, both freshmen, both had solid redshirt years. I believe they each had like a loss or two each, but very, very solid years. Cassiope has arguably had the better year so far, already beating Gannon Grummel, Trent Helger, Matt Stencil, and just propelling himself from kind of those lower teen rankings all the way up to where he is right now at number 3, where he deserves to be. And as you see, this is going to be a tough duel. Now, as I already said, looking at the rankings, yes, Iowa is the favorite. Iowa is the favorite to win. There's no denying that. However, as I said, Penn State has had 7 upsets over the last 3 duels with Iowa in particular, and we could see that happen again. Where could that happen? We don't know. Could we see some backup pulled? I doubt it, just because the lineup's kind of set now, but you never know what's up Cale Sanderson's sleeve. Now, what's my prediction for the match? Please, before I say my prediction, leave your prediction in the comments below. I want to know who's going to win each match, as well as your final score prediction. My final score prediction, I've won about this a couple times. It's 19 Iowa, 15 Penn State. I have the Hawkeyes winning. Just my score on paper right now. Would love to see great duels no matter what happens, though, and I'm interested in seeing what happens. And the last topic of the day. What do Spencer Lee and Vincenzo Joseph have in common? Interesting question, I know, because of course, Spencer Lee is a 125-pounder, and Vincenzo Joseph is a 165-pounder. I found this topic interesting because there are a lot of similarities between these two. And first, I'm going to tell you what is similar and the good similarity, and then I'm going to tell you one upsetting similarity. And so let's just talk about that. Now, similarities between these two. Both 2-time national champions. Both wrestle for Big Ten schools, multiple-time Pennsylvania state titles. They're both WPIAL champions. That's the region that each of them wrestled in. And multiple-time Powerade titles. And they both wrestled for Young Guns at points. So That's the similarities between these two. Now, the other big similarity between these two are that even with all these accolades, neither of them has won a Big Ten title. Neither of them. I know it's kind of hard to believe that neither of them have won a Big Ten title. Now, I'm going to discuss why neither of them have won a Big Ten title and if they could win a Big Ten title this year. Now, I think they both are strong favorites to win nationals this year, but Big Tens could be tough for both of them. So in the past, we've seen Spencer Lee come out in his freshman year in some of his toughest competition. Had a couple losses on that season, but his toughest competition was against Nathan Tomasello of Ohio State. They wrestled in the duel when Spencer Lee won, but at Big Tens, that's whenever Nato beat Spencer Lee in the semifinals and ended up dropping down Lee to the Consies. Ended up coming back, taking third. It was a 2-1 loss, and it was interesting as he actually beat Sebastian Rivera in the semifinals, beating him by a major 12-0, which is hard to believe nowadays with how these two have been wrestling kind of back and forth. Now, later at Nationals, he did end up avenging that loss and pinning Nato, which is a similarity again between Vincenzo and Spencer Lee, which I'll get to in just a minute, because they both avenged their losses at Nationals with a pin. Now, in 2019, just last year, Spencer Lee wrestled Sebastian Rivera. Of course, he had lost him earlier in the season at Midlands, but they wrestled again at Big Tens, and Spencer Lee lost again in sudden victory. Sebastian Rivera was the victor, kind of on a controversial hands to the face call, which I still kind of call BS on. I'm not a big fan of that rule. I don't think a lot of people are, but Sebastian ended up coming back, winning that match, but Spencer Lee ultimately ended up winning the title. And then in 2020, that's this year at Big Ten tournaments, Spencer Lee is going to see competition from Brock Hudkins of Indiana, Michael DeAugustino of Northwestern, Patrick McKee of Minnesota. I think all these are going to give him a little bit of a match, but I think ultimately Spencer Lee has a very, I think it's his strongest chance to win a Big Ten championship that he's ever had. Now, on the opposite side of that, we have Vincenzo Joseph. Vincenzo Joseph, who has been who's been beaten down in the past at Big Tens. It just hasn't been his tournament. Wrestled great seasons, wrestled great nationals, but just hasn't been his tournament at Big Tens. First of all, in 2017, his first time wrestling Big Tens, he had a loss to Eierman in the semifinals, 8-5 loss. He lost earlier that season also in a duel. Now, what the great thing about that is that year, that's when he ended up pinning Eierman in the national finals after defeating a couple guys like Daniel Lewis of Missouri and Logan Massa of Michigan. A great national tournament for Vincenzo Joseph, but just didn't quite get there at Big Tens. The following year, he lost again to Eierman, this time in the finals, lost 4-1, but they did wrestle again in the national finals whenever Vincenzo Joseph did ultimately win that. And then last year was whenever he wrestled Marinelli at Big Tens. And whenever he wrestled Marinelli, he kind of lost pretty big. He lost 9-3. Marinelli just kind of handled those overhooks, handled those throws. But Vincenzo ultimately placed above him at the national tournament, ended up making the national finals 3 years in a row. This year, he will have Marinelli again. He will have Isaiah White at 165, as well as Evan Wick. He's just going to have a stacked up Big Ten conference championship, and I think the competition will be a little bit tougher for him than Spencer Lee. This is a topic that I thought was just a little bit fun to talk about because, getting to talk about two great guys, two great wrestlers, and I think it's exciting to talk about that. Now, if you guys, that's going to do it for this week's Fanco Wrestling Show. Oh, sorry, I don't have any Iowa wrestling gear. If you have some Iowa wrestling gear or stickers or whatever, and you feel like you want to send it to me so I can rep it on the show, please feel free to just DM me on Instagram, send me an email, fancowrestling@gmail.com, because I just set up a P.O. box where I can now start receiving letters and everything from the great wrestlers and coaches and fans in the Fanco wrestling community. Now, over the next couple weeks, we're going to see some incredible duels. But until then, that's going to do it, guys, for the Fanco Wrestling Show.